Happy New Year, dear Dovies. Welcome to another entry to the Diary of Volunteers on Earth. I hope that you guys enjoyed the last few days of the old year and you haven't already fucked up all your New Year's resolutions. I certainly haven't because I didn't make any. I usually make anti-resolutions for things that I don't want to do or don't want to continue doing. Last year, for example, it was not saying yes to pretty much everything because I used to do that, and there were probably 3, maybe 4 occasions last year when I had previously committed to something and then I backed out of it later because of mental health and mental hygiene and just because I wasn't feeling in the right state on that day. So let's normalize that and let's see how this is going to work out this year. I'm gonna add trying to tackle a problem that probably bugs a lot of people out there, which is procrastination. I know, it's cliche. We'll see how that goes. But more on that at a different time before I get off track too much. And before I dive into this week's Deep Dove on the episode that came out earlier this week, let me do some podcast housekeeping real quick. Thanks to everyone who reached out on my point about deep doves not hitting deep enough. Some actually requested even more depth, like philosophical-ish thoughts and stuff. And to be honest, it's much harder than you think, maybe. And especially gaining the courage to just put your opinions and your stuff out there. I usually only do that on like private messaging groups. But I'll hopefully start to deliver eventually. So let's get to this week's Deep Dove. In the Diary of Volunteers on Earth, earlier this week, I covered an old tradition that is still very popular in a lot of especially Catholic countries, and especially in Europe, in Central Europe. In German, the tradition is called Sternsingen, and that literally means star singing, and apparently it's also known as Epiphany Singing, which I actually hadn't ever heard of, because apparently the 6th of January, which happens to be the day this Deep Dove launches, is the day of Epiphany, when the 3 wise men, the 3 kings, the 3 magi, as they're all also called, had the Epiphany to go and look for Jesus Christ. Yeah, I know. It sounds mythical and legendary, and it's nobody really knows how it was. There's only a few facts delivered about the 3 kings in the Bible. There's literally just 1 sentence, apparently. So yeah, there's a lot of fiction around that, obviously. I'm not gonna offend too many people, hopefully, out there by saying that. Who knows how Christian my listeners are. If you are tuning in from Central Europe, you probably know exactly the tradition that I'm talking about. The custom that is Sternsingen is usually observed between the 27th of December and 6th of January. And in Austria, the 6th of January is a national holiday, so people have the day off. And the whole spiel and tradition around Sternsingen is coordinated by the Catholic Youth Organization and the so-called DKA, the Dreikönigsaktion. Repeat that 3 times and I will appear in your room if you say it to your mirror. The Dreikönigsaktion literally just means 3 Kings campaign, so there's not much special about it. And I actually used to go Sternsingen myself when I was younger. I'm not exactly sure, but probably around the age of 6 to maybe 10 or 12. I don't actually know and remember when the last time was I went Sternsingen. I would have to ask my parents. They should know, but I don't remember when exactly. But I used to like it actually. It was fun. I usually did it with one of my best friends at the time, Thomas. Shout out if you're listening. And we just went to our closest church, and there were, I don't know how, probably around 50 kids, maybe even more, put into groups of 4. So there was usually 3 kings, obviously, the Kaspar, Melchior, and Balthasar, as they're called in German. And then the star bearer, and he just had one massive wooden staff with a star on top of it. And yeah, we would just go from house to house in our neighborhood around the church. Is it a parish? I don't actually know. I never really knew what a parish is, but I think that might be it. Anyways, yeah, and we would just, knock on doors, ring on bells, and hope that somebody opens the door. And then if somebody opened the door, a lot of people used to have excuses like, oh yeah, no, I don't follow this tradition. I'm not actually even Catholic. I don't want to listen. I have babies who you will disturb, blah, blah, blah. And sometimes people would be very welcoming, and they would even invite us in for drinks and whatnot. And yeah, we would do like a few carols and collect money. That is basically the tradition. The Sternsinger go around town, they knock on doors, they sing a few carols, and then they collect money. And yeah, I hope she doesn't mind that I pointed out. I know that my mom, for example, she loves this tradition. For her, it's actually really important. And she used to complain a lot that because their apartment is right in between 2 parishes, 2 churches, none of them would actually feel responsible to come around to our house and bless the house, because that's what the 3 wise men and the Sternsinger do. They not only sing carols, they put a blessing on your house. And it used to be put on the door frame with chalk, but because of a lot of door frames are white these days, or I guess they are made of materials that chalk actually doesn't adhere to, it's now stickers. And the stickers, I have one on my desk somewhere here, but I can't find it because my desk is a mess. Actually, it's quite nice today. Oh, there it is. It says 20 minus C plus M plus B minus 23 this year. The year obviously changes. And the CMB, that is always the same. And a lot of people used to think, me included obviously, that CMB just stands for Caspar, Melchior, and Balthasar, the 3 kings. But it's actually, I hope I'm not butchering this, Christus mansionem benedictat. I'm gonna look that up and then maybe redo it. Yeah, I got it right. Wow, I'm actually amazed. Christus mansionem benedictat, which is Latin for Christ may bless this house. And a lot of people, who are Catholic and who believe in it, for them it's really important that their house is blessed by the 3 wise men. Sorry, I dropped my pen. And yeah, we did that year after year, and my mom would also dress us up for our grandparents and the whole family, because my grandma and my grandpa on the side of my dad were quite religious, were quite Catholic. My grandma was actually one of the founding members of the Catholic women's movement in Austria, I believe, or in Styria, I'm not sure. So yeah, for them it was super important, and my mom would dress us up and put makeup on. Yes, I know. More on that later. On the whole, I have got a whole thing on the issue of blackfacing. Don't you worry. And yeah, that was it. And it was fun. We would get invited for lunch at one place. Usually, sometimes my mom did it. We got pizza a lot of times, and I don't actually remember much more about that. Oh yeah, no, though I remember that I loved carrying the incense around, because obviously I'm not sure which one of the kings brings the incense to Jesus, and I loved the smell, and I would always try and be the one to carry that. And then I think I stopped doing it, maybe because I just got too old and I thought it was silly, and I think that is the more probable case, because Thomas, my best friend at the time, moved away. And for me, it was just because I liked doing it with him. I liked, spending time with my friend. And that's why we did it together. And when he moved away, I stopped doing it, I think. Maybe my parents will correct me on this. Yeah. That's all the... Well, no, I have one. I have one anecdote. I remember that a lot of times when people open their apartment doors, the smell, the distinct smell from their apartment would hit you in the face like a slap. And I know I shouldn't be saying this because it's ageist, but a lot of times it was the apartment of the elderly that were especially terrible. I also remember that it was super interesting, stepping foot into somebody's apartment and just seeing what they live like. I remember there was one apartment that impressed me because this lady had a massive fish tank, but not a regular one, but like a sea salt fish tank with like sea fish in it, which was super cool. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I know it was I remember it was frustrating occasionally, because we used to do like these massive compounds where shitloads of people live, but barely anybody opened. But it was nice because we only had to walk down the stairs and not like walk around the city. Lazy me was happy about that. And then there was one time I shit my pants, I think. I don't know if it was peeing or shitting, but we were just walking around, and I think I had diarrhea at the time, and I just couldn't hold it together. And I don't remember what I did after that. It was kind of traumatic, actually. Now that I talk about it, I think my brain blurred out a lot of parts about that. Yeah, and that is my experience with Sternsingen, with caroling around. And this tradition is still upheld today, and still a lot of kids do it. So for the DOVE entry, I spoke with the PR person for the Styrian Catholic youth movement. Julia Radlingmayer is her name, and the Catholic youth movement, like I said, coordinates and organizes the whole DKA. Let's just call it DKA for reasons. And Julia shared some really impressive stats and numbers with me, and I'm gonna read out a few if I can find them. So because the main point of this tradition today is to raise funds for charitable projects. It's usually humanitarian projects, 500 of them, which I thought was incredible, that are being supported by the DKA. And in 2022, and bear in mind, this was a Corona year still, so this was not a regular year, but they broke all the records, apparently. They had over 85,000 kids, teenagers, and even adults out there on the street singing their carols to raise more than 15 million euros, which is about the same in dollars, I believe, today. And that was incredible to me. 15 million euros is kind of big bucks, actually. And since the beginning of the campaign, which was in the 50s, a total of more than 500 million euros has been raised by the DKA. And that is just amazing, I think. Anyways, and this year, the main project that is being supported is in northern Kenya, in the regions of Marsabit and Samburu in northern Kenya. And Julia told me that around 80% of the people there still live as nomads, herding cattle, goats, sheep, camels, whatnot. And kind of obviously, because of the climate crisis, they've had absolutely no rain for almost 3 years straight, I believe, which is far longer periods of drought that they used to have to deal with. And as one can imagine, that is literally life-threatening to them, because no rain means no grass means no fodder for their animals, no animals means no food for them, and a lot of them, they have poor to no education. A lot of the kids are not able to visit schools, so the overall situation is just not ideal, I would say. And I'm actually gonna dive deeper on this topic as well, because when Julia was talking about this was an issue that I always kind of have in the back of my mind, or I've had ever since I learned about it, maybe 2 years ago. I think during the Black Lives Matter movement, actually. And every time that I hear about, like, humanitarian projects, development projects in the so-called global south, which, as far as I know, is a problematic term in itself, or when people post pictures like, oh yeah, I went to, I don't know, Kenya or Uganda to volunteer there, and they post pictures with kids on their arms, and I've learned that this is called the White Savior complex, or also the White Savior industrial complex. And I'm gonna talk about this a little bit because I think it is interesting, and I think we, and with me, I mean probably most of my listeners who are probably in quite privileged positions, because if you are like me, you are white, you were raised in a country that is one of the best countries to be raised in the world. So yeah, privilege is definitely a thing. And this term, white savior complex, it derives from the cinematic trope of the white savior, where a central white character saves one or a group of non-white characters. And Wikipedia, for example, names movies like Avatar or The Last Samurai or even 12 Years a Slave as examples for this movie trope, the white savior. And the term white savior industrial complex was coined by the Nigerian-American author Teju Cole in reaction to the Kony 2012 video. If you are anywhere near my age and you were using the internet back then, you might remember the Kony documentary. It was a documentary on this warlord in Nigeria called Joseph Kony, I think. And you can definitely check it out if you have never heard of it. It was kind of mind-blowing at the time. I remember there was a big uproar around it, and I'll put that video and all the information on Teju Cole in the show notes. And Cole argues that the main point of such documentaries is not actually, and I'm going to quote him on this, it's not actually about justice, it's about having the emotional experience that validates privilege. Let that sink in. It's not actually about justice, but having the emotional experience that validates privilege. And others argue that white saviorism is even a form of white supremacy, because white people try to help the quote-unquote poor suppressed people in the global south. And I'm aware that as a white cis male from a privileged country, I can only burn my fingers talking about topics like that. But when I learned about this concept, it certainly made me think, it made me reflect. And yeah, fuck it. Even now, like as I'm recording this, I'm thinking, I guess one could call the whole Diary of Volunteers on Earth kind of a white savior-ish endeavor. I'm not sure. Is it supposedly, I guess, from a post-colonialistic view, I guess the global north having to help the global south to rise to, certain Western standards? I guess you could make the argument that it's just the same as saying that we have civilized and uncivilized parts of the world, and you just swap the words for global south and global north, or the other way around. But I'm just, I'm asking myself, does that mean that any sort of foreign aid and any sort of humanitarian project is automatically white saviorism? And I tend to think the answer is no. I'm super curious, if you're listening to this, what your take on this is. But I talked about this, or actually Julia brought it up herself. Of course, she didn't use the term white saviorism, but the DKA has addressed this criticism. And Julia told me about the approach that the DKA has, which is a holistic approach. That the projects that they carry out, or that they facilitate in countries like Kenya, they are based on the concept of self-to-self help. So people in Kenya, for example, they probably know best how to help themselves. Obviously, I mean, this should be a no-brainer actually. And the point of the DKA is support them so they are able to support themselves better. And that could be done with, means of infrastructure, financial, which costs money, which communities might not have. So you need the financial support for that infrastructure, so you can implement systems that enable self-help, basically. You just have to start somewhere, I guess. I mean, I'm no expert on foreign aid and foreign development and whatnot, but it sounds logical to me. And Julia ensured to me that all the projects that they run, they are regularly audited and checked, and a lot of them run over the span of several years. Usually you have to apply or hand in a project, and it's being thoroughly checked. And they run for 3 years, and some even longer, because then they can be extended. So they make sure that there is some sort of quality management, I guess. So much on the whole thing of white saviorism. And the other thing that was kind of touchy and is a hot topic, I guess, still, is what I already mentioned earlier, the topic of blackfacing. And as I have already mentioned on my Twitter and Instagram, you can check the posts out there. I wrote a thread on blackfacing in the context of Sternsingen. And in Austria, at least, or I think in other countries as well, Sternsinger used to be painted not only black, but also yellow and red. And it's kind of interesting because me and other people that I've talked to automatically assumed that, black represents Africa, yellow represents Asia, and red, well, represents Native America. But turns out that red actually doesn't represent Native America, because supposedly the whole, painting faces was meant as a sign of inclusion that roots in the 14th century idea that the message and the blessings of Jesus were meant for everyone, They were not only meant for, white folks in Europe, they were meant for everyone, regardless their skin color. So back then, only 3 continents were explored. Nobody knew about the Americas. So black, yes, represented Africa. Yellow, yes, represented Asia. And red actually represented Europe. And so there were 3 kings in 3 different colors and the star bearer. And now, to me, the most obvious question is, when we're talking about blackfacing in the context of Sternsingen, does a society need to keep a tradition? Because painting those faces is all but it's just a tradition. Do we need to keep that just for tradition's sake? Even though members of that society feel discriminated against. I'm just gonna post that question out there. You can feel free to let me know what you think, because the argument against blackfacing is it's very simple. It undoubtedly has a racist history, no question about it. In the 19th century, white actors were painted black for minstrel shows to show stereotypical, quote unquote, stereotypical behavior by slaves. So yeah, it's obviously racist. Today's blackfacing in black communities is still seen as highly disrespectful and just blatantly racist. For example, in Austria, an initiative called Black Voices, which is an anti-racist initiative and movement, they last year publicly asked the Austrian Catholic youth to stop blackfacing because, quote unquote, tradition is not an excuse for racism. And, quote unquote, it's hurtful and discriminating. So that's all you need to know. In my opinion, if something is hurtful and discriminating, and I know I might have said this on the podcast before, if not, now it's on record. I know I used to be an asshole myself. I used to do shitloads of things that were hurtful. Not necessarily discriminating to groups of people, but hurtful to individuals. And I'm still not there yet. I mean, occasionally I will still drop something that might hurt somebody else. And I was already called out for not stating my opinion on this whole topic enough. So here we go. Obviously, it's stupid as fuck to cling to a tradition just for tradition's sake when it's hurtful to other people. That is my opinion. There's no legitimate reason. I mean, yeah, that's it. I don't really know what else to say. I don't know what it says about me that I have to say this out loud on a podcast for people to know where my position is on this. Probably nothing too good, but there you go. But I still want to add a few more thoughts to it. And one of those is that I think it's always much easier to judge others from your point of view for their supposed, misbehaviors or wrong opinions or takes or political positions. That is always harder than trying to empathize with their position and trying to put yourself in their shoes, especially when the gap between those two positions is rather large. But I think it would help us to try and see where the other person is coming from. Even if one doesn't end up agreeing, that's not necessary. It's just trying to understand various perspectives. And I think that is essential in a lot of discourses. And I've had this conversation with a lot of people many times. And I've heard others talk about it too on other podcasts. The whole tribalism thing that is being perpetuated by social media is certainly not helping us to empathize with other positions. And the whole echo chamber thing where, your own opinion is being reflected to you back and forth on social media because that's how algorithms work. It's not helpful. It's not healthy for a society, if you ask me. So that's one thought. The other one is that each and every one of us gets to choose with how much humor or self-humor, with how much sarcasm, and with how much differentiation they want to walk through life. And on the other hand, we also get to choose with how much judgment, prejudice, and controversy we want to go through life. Personally, I'm somewhere between the humor, self-humor, controversy thing. I try to reduce prejudice and judgment as much as I can. Sarcasm sometimes, differentiation, working on it. And obviously there's a lot of other aspects, but I'm just gonna boil it down to these at the moment. And we also have to be aware that our choices on what we say, what we write, what we show, what we do, and how we have to live our lives has consequences. And also the things that we don't say, write, show, do, that has consequences as well. So one thing that I didn't mention on my Twitter thread, because I felt like it went a little bit off topic, but I have the time here, and if you're still listening, first of all, I'm impressed and grateful, thank you. But then that means that you won't mind that I talk about this as well, and that's the whole issue of the quote unquote morale police, that or the Twitter tribunal. I don't know how to pronounce that word. That has been born out of necessity because people still don't know how to use the internet correctly, or they still abuse the internet, let's say. And I know that most of my peers probably don't share this opinion, but I believe that we won't go very far as humankind and as a global society if we're always, kind of standing next to the next person, looming over their head with the scary judgment sword of morale and ethics, and telling everybody else how terrible they are for doing and saying such and such, and instead of caring about what we do and what we put out there. And I know that I am occasionally guilty of this myself. Like, don't get me wrong. All I can do is try and work on it and improve it to do it less. Yeah, I mean, it always comes down to this saying that my mom, I think, used to say to me and my brothers quite a lot. And I remember that my religion teacher also used to say it back in primary school. It's a German saying that literally translates to sweep in front of your own door first. And it basically just means mind your own fucking business before you criticize others. So, yeah. And honestly, I'm bothered by the amount of self-censorship that people apply because of this sort of moral policing. I just don't think it's very constructive to completely self-censor. And I don't see this contradicting the belief that obviously we need to be careful and thoughtful with what we say and how we say it, especially when it comes to hurting and discriminating or even harassing other people. But both of those ideas and concepts can coexist, if you ask me. They don't contradict each other. Maybe I'm illogical on that. Please let me know if you think otherwise. I would be super curious to, engage in some kind of discourse with people on these kind of topics. So please reach out if you're interested. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I'm 35 minutes in. Before I get too deep on these topics, just let me address the second half of the DOVE entry from this week, because Julia Radlingmayer wasn't the only person that I talked to. I also had the pleasure to talk to some fellow scouts, Florian and Teresa. and they were both scout leaders at my group. In fact, they were leaders when I was young, and I was on some summer camps with them. And both their daughters, Julia and Johanna, they are active scouts in our group right now. And the reason I got them on the podcast is because they all participated in Sternsingen this year. Not only the two kids, but also Florian and Teresa in an adult group. An adult Sternsinger group, which I guess is rather rare. But they both, as they both stated on the podcast, they wouldn't want to miss it. And it felt really weird when they weren't able to sing, or I had to do it in front of the computer back in 2020 because of COVID. And their motivation is easy. It's a mixture of, being able to do something good. And I think Florian summarized it the best when he said that, you just have to sacrifice a couple of days every year. And you can still do good in the world. You can collect money for people who may need it. And you can brighten up people's faces with a few songs who are waiting for the blessing of the Sternsinger to arrive at the beginning of the year. That's as simple as it is. And for Teresa, it was also, the tradition and that they always used to do it, and the nostalgic kind of feeling. That's why they liked doing it. And we also talked about traditions in general and how Sternsingen has changed over the course of the last couple of decades. So I think today it might be it might be very different from when I was walking around back in the day. And Teresa raised an interesting point when she compared the number of kids in their compound that rang their doorbell for Halloween this year and the number of kids that go Sternsingen. And there's a massive gap. And she was just wondering, what would happen if they all went Sternsingen as well and would raise even more money. And I thought about this a little bit, actually, and it's a funny comparison if you think about it, because one is literally dressing up as a kid to go from door to door to knock on doors to get candy for yourself. Maybe if you're really nice, for your younger siblings as well, but usually for yourself. And the other one is dressing up to go from door to door to knock on doors to ask for money for somebody who's really far away and who probably really needs it. So I guess stripped down from all the history and the religious belief and the traditions behind Halloween and Sternsingen, they're kind of just counterparts to each other. Where Halloween is just the egocentrical, evil twin, I guess. No hate for Halloween. I used to go trick-or-treating as well, so I did both back in the day. So I can say that, actually. But yeah, back then, it was different. Barely anyone went trick-or-treating, and now the whole ratio has flipped upside down, I guess. What a time to be alive, eh? Okay, yeah, and I guess I'm at the end of my script, so I've been monologuing for 40 minutes. Kind of a weird feeling, actually. There's a fly in my mouth. Yeah, I guess it's time to bring this deep dove back to the surface. And yeah, just remember, if some funny-looking dudes in robes and hopefully without any facial makeup ring your doorbell these days, make sure to welcome them in. Maybe offer them some hot betties. Listen to their songs. Give them some money. It's for a good cause. And do that for Halloween too. Just don't invite the kids in for babies. That might be weird when it's Halloween. Yeah, also make sure to hit that follow or subscribe button. Hit the thumbs up on YouTube or the rating on Spotify. Hopefully I'll be rolling out on podcasts, on Apple Podcasts at some point soon in the future. Stay tuned for the next entry into the Diary of Volunteers on Earth next week. That's it for me today. Peace and much love, and good luck with your New Year's resolutions.